we would like to also hear from Ian Cronin from the World Economic Forum, where he will address the same topic about where is he moving to, where is the World Economic Forum moving, and the impact they're doing in the world regarding this industry.
Thank you so much, Laura and Adriana and the whole team who helped organize today's event. It's an honor to be here. Maria Teresa, I think you covered almost everything, so it's hard to know what to add here. But no, I think that there's a couple things. One, to go back to your original question around making the fashion industry more collaborative, how can we really create this environment of cooperation? And I think that, Maria Teresa was hitting on some of these points, particularly in sort of the last couple of her key concluding topics, which I think it does often start with the brands. And I've seen some comments even in the chat box coming in about the role of brands and what their potential is here. But I think you're seeing some downward pressure or upward pressure, depending on how you look at it, from brands back up to their supply chain. But it's only going to get us so far. And I think for me and my sort of personal journey, I know that was part of your question, was a surprise of how often I think people, maybe those who are like-minded on this call today, have noted the connection between sustainability and increased competitiveness. But this narrative, when I started having conversations, particularly with organizations and companies at the middle of supply chains, was that hasn't really filtered down, or they understand it in some sort of abstract way, but it doesn't actually get built into the business model. And I think that this happens for a number of reasons. But the most probably critical element is that at the end of the day, companies are making their decisions of who they're going to do business with, whether we're talking about the weavers or the spinners or the dyers, all the different parts of the supply chain Maria Teresa mentioned, based on the price point. And I think that unless we start to having conversations where the sustainability metrics and elements get included in that, I mean, you're often not talking about a massive difference in price, particularly for some of these large brands. But when you're talking about, huge quantities of numbers for some of these factories, those numbers do add up. And so I think there's an element here of how also can we talk about how traceability and transparency can support in these elements, but also how can we build in and support the provision of advanced manufacturing processes and technologies that can support these companies in the middle of the supply chain. And I think when you start pulling that ecosystem of pieces together, that's when you'll start seeing some of this change that we're looking for. And I think that does require, as I was talking about, this narrative element to be conveyed upstream, that when we are more sustainable, when we start doing some of these things, we actually create long-term competitiveness gains that pays off. We create a win-win. And at the same time, we need brands to also really commit to saying there are certain sustainability metrics. There are certain things that they have expectations around traceability and transparency that they expect from their suppliers. And if you don't do them, then there's you aren't included in those supply chains. But we can't just do that. Again, I think there's a limitation there on sort of the downward pressure, because you're not actually taking advantage of the opportunity to help raise the idea of a rising tide lifts all boats. Because in this sense, by supporting these players in the middle, we actually can support the entire industry. It's an interesting moment, I think, for me when I think about that narrative. Because you mentioned what is the impact of COVID-19 on all of this. And I think what you're seeing, if you look back 3 years, more than a third of CEOs and supply chain officers said that lack of visibility in their supply chain was a critical risk to their organization, but they didn't really do anything about it. They didn't take necessary steps to solve that, part of which was because of the complexity of the supply chain that we've already talked about. Part of it was also because, as we're seeing even today, you're trying to stay in business. You're trying to find your competitive advantage. There's a lot of companies trying to do what you're doing. And I think what COVID-19, this is a catastrophic global moment, but also contains an opportunity here. At the forum, our chairman refers to this moment as the Great Reset, in that we have a potential for a Great Reset if we take advantage of it. And I think part of that goes back to this conversation around the supply chain and the narrative around sustainability that we need to communicate through the middle of the supply chain and how that can help everyone. Companies are seeing that the companies who are struggling the most in the midst of the global supply chain breakdowns in COVID-19 were the ones who had the least visibility in their supply chain. They couldn't adapt because they didn't know where the bottlenecks were going to happen. And I think that as companies are realizing that they need better collaboration and communication for strictly a business standpoint, this is also an opportunity to say that extends to these sustainability conversations, that extends to the traceability. And it would be a huge miss if we didn't take advantage of that. And I think that takes a lot of concerted effort from, you know, the 205 people on this call who clearly care about this issue to make sure that we're having those conversations, that people see these opportunities. I think that maybe I'll pause there, but I think that's at least to answer some of your early questions where I'd fall on them to begin with.
So thank you, Ian. This is really very straight to the point. I mean, it's true. It's a great reset for us. Actually, I consider COVID one of the best gifts to humanity to really change.